Hi, my name is Christina Taylor, and I'm a paper conservator at the Straus Center for Conservation and Technical Studies at the Harvard Art Museums. Today I'm coming to you from my home studio where I'm going to be demonstrating and breaking down the relief aquatint technique that Dan Flavin used to make 3 incredible prints in our collection. These series of prints are 1 in 5 series of relief aquatint prints that Flavin made between 1986 and 1996. He worked with printers at Gemini in Los Angeles and also with Catherine Mosley in New York. And Mosley is the one who printed the prints in our collection. During this period, Flavin experimented with printing different color fields on handmade papers. Some papers were circular like these, and some were rectangular. He even rolled some of his circular prints to make them more sculptural, although these prints that I'm showing you and the ones that I'll be discussing today were intended to be flat. These series of prints are known as Flavin's paper discs. And one of the interesting things about them is that they're printed double-sided. We think of prints as having a very distinct front and back, recto or verso. But here in the pictures that I'm showing you, where you can see both sides of each of the 3 prints in the collection, he didn't really prioritize one side or the other. In fact, he signed both sides. So this is an interesting and kind of unusual way to think about prints as not having a clear front or back. Another interesting thing about these prints is that they're printed on circular papers. These papers are handmade at Twin Rocker Paper Mill. And one of the distinctive things about them is the really exaggerated decal. A decal is the kind of feathery, irregular edge around the sheet. This is an example, a sample of paper from Twin Rocker Mill, and you can see it has the irregular deckled edge. Another thing you can see about this paper is that it's pretty robust. It's actually a pretty thick paper. And it also, something you might not be able to see, but it has a texture to it. So this is a really high quality paper, and I think especially the feathery deckled edge is something that Flavin was really attracted to. And finally, you'll see that these prints don't have an image. It's just a field of color printed over the entire sheet. And on the opposite side, there's a different color filling the opposite side of the sheet. And this is kind of interesting to think about in direct contrast to most works of art, where the image is central to what makes the art. But in this case, Flavin is interested in ideas of color and light relationships. So the saturation of color he's able to achieve in these prints is directly related to the relief aquatint technique that I'm going to be showing you guys today. Before diving into the process, I couldn't help but show you another angle of our studio where the lights on our ceiling are very Flavin inspired. This is a total coincidence, but fits perfectly with the theme of the talk today. Dan Flavin is an artist best known for his light tube installations. And if you're not familiar with his work, I recommend doing a Dan Flavin web search, and you should be able to pull up a lot of results of this work. I think having the context of his main body of work is really important when we go to look closely at the prints. First, I'd like to break down some terminology for you guys. This is an example of a relief print. This here is a woodcut that was printed from this carved block. What makes it a relief print is that the areas that receive ink and are transferred to the paper are in relief to the areas on the block that are carved away. The opposite of a relief print is an intaglio print. This is an etching, which is a form of intaglio, and it was printed from this copper plate. What makes this the opposite of relief is that instead of the ink being transferred from the top surface of the matrix, the ink in the recessed grooves of the matrix is what transfers to the paper. So in this case, you can see that the lines that are recessed in the copper are what print onto the paper. And this is an example of an aquatint. An aquatint is traditionally a tonal etching technique. So instead of ink gathering in lines, as in the line etching, there are tiny amorphous pits that gather ink, and that ink is what transfers to the paper during printing. Since aquatints are almost always printed intaglio, I'm going to show you both the intaglio and relief aquatint printing techniques so you can compare the printing, but also the resulting prints and what kinds of effects are achievable with both methods. I'm going to start off with the Intaglio Aquatint Printing. First thing I'm going to do is get a little bit of this ink out of the tube. And I'm going to take my card and apply it onto the plate. So what's going on now is ink is being applied over the entire plate. So the top surfaces of the plate and the lower grooves are getting filled with ink. So there's ink everywhere. And one of the things I'm doing right now is pressing the ink down into the grooves of the aquatint. And I'm going to use the tarlatan to only wipe away ink on the top surface. So since this is an Intaglio print, I want the ink to stay in the lower grooves, and I'm removing the ink from the top. So that's what the tarlatan does. The tarlatan both removes ink from the top surface onto the tarlatan, but it also drives some of the ink down into the grooves of the plate. So I think that is about ready to print. I'll put my inked plate onto the press. I have paper here soaking that I'm going to blot. Damp paper softens the paper fibers, and this is going to produce a stronger impression. I'm placing my paper onto the inked plate. Newsprint will keep my ink from dirtying up the press blankets. I'm laying the blankets down and cranking everything through the press. And revealed, the Intaglio Aquatint sample print. So now to print the relief aquatint, I'm going to use the same plate and the same ink, but instead of applying the ink with a card, what I'm going to do is use a brayer to apply the ink to the surface. So the relief aquatint is printed in the exact same way as the Intaglio counterpart. The damp paper is placed down. It's cranked through the press. And here we have the relief aquatint sample print. So now that I've printed the two samples, let's take a look at them and see the differences. This is the Intaglio aquatint print and the relief aquatint print. I'm going to point out some of the things you might notice right away, the first being the saturation of the colors. So in the relief aquatint print, the colors are much more saturated than in the Intaglio counterpart. To be fair to Intaglio, you can absolutely create deep, rich colors with the aquatint technique. However, this is a plate that was etched very lightly. It was only in the acid for a short amount of time. But it's just to show you that the relief aquatint technique can still achieve these really bold, vibrant colors with a plate that's very lightly etched. I'm jumping in here to interrupt myself and show you this Intaglio aquatint value scale at the right. The section at the bottom was etched for the shortest amount of time, for only 30 seconds, and it's the lightest value. And the section at the top was etched for 30 minutes, and it's very dark. My sample plate was only etched for a few minutes, and that's why the colors are lighter. Okay, back to the comparisons. The second thing you'll notice is that in the Intaglio version, there is a difference in tone. So this is the area of the plate that was lightly etched, and this one was more deeply etched. So Intaglio aquatint is great for artists who want images that modulate tone and shadows and shapes. In fact, the aquatint technique was invented to replicate watercolor paintings. The relief counterpart here This is the area of the plate that was lightly etched and more deeply etched, and you can see there's no difference in the image, it's just a uniform color field. And this is the way that it was printed. The ink was rolled over the surface like a relief print, but in reality, ink is also being kind of driven down into the grooves of the aquatint. The aquatint is really serving as a tooth for the ink to hold on to. If I were to just take the inky brayer and roll over a copper plate that had no aquatint on it, it would be very streaky and uneven. But the aquatint gives this grain or tooth for the ink to hold on to, so it creates this very even, very uniform, solid area of color. And the final thing I'm going to say is something you can't really see, but the Intaglio technique is very laborious. It takes a long time to wipe down plates. The relief technique, where you roll ink over the surface, is much faster, and it's advantageous for printers to come up with methods that make their lives a little bit easier too. So to end my talk today, I'm going to print a mini Flavin reproduction print. Here are some circular papers, and I made these here. You can see they have a deckled edge because they're handmade. These are about 4 inches in diameter, and remember that Flavins prints are about 12 inches in diameter, so these are significantly smaller than Flavins prints. Here's one of the sheets that I printed on a few weeks ago. I printed this violet color on one side, but the opposite side is still white. It's yet to be printed. And this is a good reminder that Flavins prints are on white paper. So even though the whole white sheet is obscured on both sides, they are white sheets. So this is the side that I'm going to print on to finish up the reproduction. To print the reproduction, I'm going to be using a larger aquatinted plate because the plate I used earlier for the small samples is too small for my circular sheets to fit. I'm going to be using the same ink I used to print the samples earlier, and I'm going to roll the ink onto the surface. I don't need to cover the entire plate with ink, but I am covering an area that's larger than the diameter of the paper so that the entire sheet is covered during printing. And the printing is going to happen the exact way as it did before. The inked plate is put onto the press, the damp paper with the white side down goes onto the inked plate, newsprint is added to keep the blankets clean and protected, and it's cranked through the press. And then the print is revealed. I hope that seeing the relief aquatint printing technique in action has given you a better sense of how these prints were made and why Flavin and his printers made the decisions that they did to achieve the final results of a really luminous, vibrant, stunning print. Thank you so much.